Hi, welcome back to another TerranScapes video. This video today we're going to take a look at some Bragdon rock molds. These are made by Mr. Bragdon of Bragdon Enterprises, and these are rocks that, well, I should say the molds are molds that I've covered in the past in a couple videos, but I'm not going to link to them. If you want to go and find them just to see the textures, that's fine, but I really feel like this is going to replace those videos in terms of a review of the molds and their quality and my overall experience with them. Because what I've done is I have cast several pieces from them, and I have used those casts to make my own molds from in a slightly different way, which you will see. And that has been extremely instructive about latex molds, this type of a face to mold, and what I think are maybe the legitimate areas that could be improved in terms of Bragdon Enterprises making the molds, but also some of the things that I really probably attributed to them when I was first taking a look at them. So, excuse me. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. This is going to be part one. This is going to go over the molds themselves and what I learned about mold making. Part two, we're going to take a look at the casts that have been coming out of these molds and talk about a little bit more about the molds and the way they perform overall. So let's take a look at the molds themselves and the way they have been arranged. So I'm going to come to the molds themselves actually later in this segment, but I just wanted to let you know right off the bat what we're actually talking about, so they're basically rubber molds made from latex rubber, and they are made of a rock face, right? So you get this imprint in it if you're new to mold making. Don't mind this. I made a mistake and poured some plastic in it. Doesn't matter. I'm not using this mold anymore, and don't mind these marks. These are actually going to be for the second video. But anyway, you pour plastic into this, then you pour foam into it, and when you do that, you produce, let's swap these here, and you produce the cast that looks like this. Now, this is a wonderful piece because it's really detailed. It's got a lot of very, very deep cuts in it, and fissures, and the detail on it is just really, really nice. It's one of the most amazing rock faces I've seen as a mold to date in person. And I wanted to actually add a second mold to this so that I could create a larger piece, and I spoke to Mr. Bragdon, and I will talk about that in the second video in a little more detail, but he recommended a complementary mold. I'm not going to show you the mold, but this is the cast that comes from it. And the idea being, right, that we have a very similar texture so that we can then, oh, I'll try not to block the camera here. New angles for me, new camera for me. So that we could then stitch this together and make a more interesting, larger face, because I'm really interested in trying to not have repeats when I tile these pieces together. And I'm definitely going to be tiling these because I need large rock faces for the ocean boards. So when I got this second piece and I was taking a look at it, now, I don't want you to pay attention to any of the defects. Whoops, let me change this so I can see it. Don't pay attention to these defects. Some of these are my fault, and I'll explain that later. All right, that's going to be in part two of this. But I just want you to take in the overall shape of the face here and the texture. And that texture is, of course, similar to this, right? You can tell it's from the same rock face, but it literally is from this mold. So what he did, and what I've done here, is I have, I don't know if you'll be able to see it very well from the back camera here. What I've done is I've marked this section, all right, with a little Sharpie here, a silver Sharpie. It comes around and it goes over and it comes up to here. There we go, like that. All right, so basically this section right here comes right from this section right here. And that was actually very instructive because I've wondered about some of the features of these molds and how they were created, because it seems to me like some of these areas where you have this sort of rough texture, you can see some rough texture around the edges, you can, things like that, it's sort of like, well, is that talus? If that's talus, why isn't it falling out? Like, how was this oriented when it was really on the rock face? When I looked at this piece, I said to myself, what is going on there? Like, I don't understand how these geologic formations came together. But now it makes sense, because for some of the molds, perhaps for many of them, what he's doing is he's modifying the master that he created to create smaller pieces, stitch them together, and then they've been stitched together with some various other rock pieces, sometimes glue and sand. That's my opinion on it. So I will say I was disappointed, because I wanted a unique addition to this face, not a replication of what was already on there. The only benefit this provided me is I was able to copy this and this piece faster, right? I could do each of them together, so I could increase the amount of pieces I had to cut apart and to make my own master, which I'll show you in a bit. So that was the first instruction I got on the Bragdon molds. And the second thing that I noticed is that along the edges here, there is this weird texture. Let me find a good spot here. All right, so you can see it right there. There's this weird texture. Now, the lighting on this camera is maybe not going to be optimum for this video, so bear with me. I can try to fix it in the post-production, but I'm still learning a little bit about this new setup, so bear with me. In any case, though, there's this strange texture, and it took me a while to figure out. Here's a very good example of that. Like, what is going on there? Well, when I cast this, a piece pucked off of the plastic. It delaminated from the foam. Oh, I should probably show you the back if you're new to this. This is a better one, right? So plastic is poured into the mold. All right, here's my mold. Plastic is poured in, then you back it with foam, and then you take it out. Now, because it's 2 layers, sometimes the layers separate. This creates a bubble texture right along this spot, and then he has subsequently made his rubber molds from a damaged master, and this is what all this is around the edges. This is all damaged area where it has lifted, the plastic has lifted from the foam. So that was a disappointment when I realized that. So I'm going to leave the quality of the molds aside for the moment, because that's really the big focus for the next video. But I just wanted to point that out while we're looking at the tiling, and then me talking about what is this rough area in between, like in a spot like right here, like what, oh wait, right there. What is going on in there? So this is area where he has put pieces in and then filled it with some kind of a filler to give it a sand or a rock texture of some sort. So that was a huge learning moment in terms of what's actually going on. Never before have I had 2 molds that were complementary before, so I couldn't do this, and it explains why the first mold I have has some textures on it that don't seem to match. The mold is big enough, and this is pretty big, right? You could cut out pieces for a terrain element. So it's very versatile, and I still have to say, it's got outstanding texture on it. This is the first pull that I made from the mold, and so you get a sense of what you get right out of the mold if you do a decent job during the casting process, and I think I'm doing a pretty good job at this point. All right, so there's that. Now I wanted to show you, oh, I'll be right back. So what you see here is the mold that I made after I stitched together a gob of parts from casting the pieces I just showed you, probably 5 times each, cutting out all the pieces that I wanted, and then making my mold from that. And we're going to talk about how to make this mold in a minute, but I still want to talk about the parts and the composition. So I took all those parts and I made this mold. Now the sheet that it produces now looks like this. And what I did, if you look, and in fact here I'll show you to give you some idea. All right, so I was looking at this original piece, right, and this chunk right here that's replicated on both of the molds that I purchased. And if you look, you can see this chunk represented in some of these areas, right? So it's here and it's here. And it's also partially, wait a minute, you know what, I marked these on some of these pieces, and now look at me, I'm like, where is it? In any case, here's a piece of it right here. But what I did is, whenever possible, and I got better as I got further along, is that I would cut even into it rather than taking a whole chunk out, so I could use this piece, you know, so I could use this piece and then, you know, use this piece somewhere else. Oh, in frame, Mike. This piece, and then separate this piece off, right? And by fracturing it, I could get a more seamless tiling amongst the entire sheet, and you wouldn't see replication as much. Now actually, I got better as I got towards the edge of the mold, because when I started right in the beginning, and the beginning has more duplication, but it's not a big deal. This is going to be modified, and overall, I was pretty pleased with it. So this gives you an idea of where I started and where I ended up, and this then becomes a discussion of, well, what did I do to get here, and what is Mr. Bragdon doing to get here, aside from, all right, aside from the actual master quality itself, okay? A good master makes a good mold, and a good mold makes good casts. All right, so we're not going to talk about the master exactly, because I think there's problems with it, and good things, but let's just take it from there and talk about making the mold. So, and this is not the master. I wanted to compare them more evenly. All right, so the master is out in the studio somewhere, okay, but this is the first cast that I pulled from the Bragdon mold, and this is the first cast that I pulled from my own. So, it's big, I know, it's big, but I'm like, if you're, you know, going in for a penny, go in for the whole pound. Let's make a big sheet, and I can always cut it up later. All right, so let me take these pieces away, and let me put the molds back up, and we're gonna go back to Mr. Bragdon's mold. And I should probably keep this out. All right. Now, this is not a tutorial on how to make a latex mold, okay? So it might help you a little bit, but that's not the purpose of it here today. It's about to say, how did I figure out what he was doing, and what did I do differently, and you know, what did I learn? So if this was the master, okay, then he paints, I think it's like this, it's close enough for our purposes. You paint the latex on multiple layers, you let that set, and then you can peel it off to get your mold. Now, one of the things that I've always wondered about when he makes his molds is that, first of all, there's some uneven coloring in the interior of the mold, and I'm not really quite sure, even today, exactly why that is. I have some ideas. But, so there's that issue. Also, the mold has a very, very thin, rough edge, and in fact, it's been a bit of an issue when I'm casting, because if I try to fill resin all the way to the edges, it wraps around and it gets snagged on it. So I actually have trimmed this a little bit to get it more regularly shaped, because these edges are not necessarily resin friendly when they get coated on both sides, and you can see how frequently that happens. Then I wondered what was going on here. Like, you know, maybe the latex is so thick that you just spread it on and slather it on. So that was where I started. And then I wanted to make my own mold. So I have some latex on hand, and I did a little research. And the recommendation, okay, so here's, I'm going to flip it over, right? This is on top of my mold, my master, I mean. The recommendation is that you do about maybe 20 coats of latex to get a thick enough, right, a thick enough shell that you're not going to damage it when you, you know, pull it off or cast from it. What you see here is just over 20 coats. And then they say that you can strengthen it by adding cheesecloth to one of the, or multiple of final layers, right, as we build it up. And you should be able to see that texture inside the rubber there. That's the cheesecloth texture. And that strengthens it and makes it a little more rigid. But mine does not look at all like his. And in fact, it was very difficult to get areas that were built up thickly. And that was a concern of mine, because if you have a very thin spot, right, it's more prone to tearing, or, you know, especially because this texture is so aggressive, right? Some of these cuts are so deep that, you know, you really have to pull the rubber out to get it out. And this is why latex is really the best choice in this instance, because it has the highest tear resistance of any material for mold making that I'm aware of. And it is crazy tear resistant. Doesn't mean I can't tear it, but it holds up to a lot of abuse. All right, so that's why latex is being used. Why is this different? I realized after I started, and you know, I didn't want to order any, that you can get a latex filler. Now the problem with latex is if you bulk it up too fast, you'll seal in, just like an acrylic gel, you'll seal in something that's uncured, and it will never cure in the interior. Obviously, not a good thing. So I had to stay with very thin layers. But look at how thick the brush strokes are on this. So my suspicion is he's using a filler in the rubber so that he can thicken it and make heavier coats more quickly that don't affect its curing, right? The filler is designed to allow this to set up even when you apply it at a thicker layer. So that's what I believe he's doing. And in fact, after having done this and another mold that's complementary to this, yeah, I think it's a good idea to get some filler, because it would have been nice to at least break that down into maybe 15 coats and still get a little bit of a thicker you know, body to the rubber. And some of these areas, you know, like here, this is a very, this is full, you know, there's very little dent on this side, and that is chock full, and that would take dozens and dozens and dozens of casts to fill this using the conventional way. So that's why I ended up thinking that he was using a filler. Now, the next thing that you need to be aware of is vulcanizing the rubber. Now, the rubber is, if you buy latex, it will either be pre-vulcanized or self-vulcanizing, or it needs external vulcanizing. What is vulcanizing? This is what RTV stands for, room temperature vulcanizing rubber. So silicones and acrylics, they set up on their own, and they don't need additives to make them reach their peak of durability. With latex, the latex I have is self-vulcanizing, but you have to leave it out for like 2 weeks, and it will basically the sulfur bonds stitch together to interlock all of the latex, you know, layers, and that's what gives it its durability. Alternatively, you can boil it, and that's what I did. I folded this up. I have a big kettle, and I folded it up and stuffed it in the hot water, and it definitely did something to it, because when it came out, it was much, much darker than when I had put it in. So you could tell that the rubber had set more, you know, it had cured more than it was when I put it in. Which made me wonder about his vulcanizing. And I am gonna say I can't really make a guess on it. I'm thinking, you know, that these areas might, if you notice on the back of my mold, all right, you'll see that we've got some areas that are discolored, okay? It's not a uniform color all the way through, and I think that that might be because some of the areas either were a little too thick, it cured, but it's not cured, you know, it's not fully vulcanized, and may never because of the thickness of the layers. Or it's a variation in the thickness itself. As it gets thicker, it just loses some of that. But some of these spots where it's lighter, they're not thin spots, so it makes me think it might have gotten put down too heavily. And I'm wondering if maybe that is part of the reason why his has a variation in color. And you can notice on this side that there's actually some variation in color on the top as well, because some of this is a darker tan and some of this is more of a yellow-green than the other layers. And so, you know, again, I wanted to sleuth it out. I want to know, what did he do? Not because I want to copy it or steal it, but I want to learn from it so that I can then do a better job when I go to tackle my own project. What's working here? What do I think needs to be improved, and how can I do that? One thing all right, I'm going to talk about the overall quality at the end of the second video. Oh, and I forgot to mention, please don't judge his molds fully until the end of the second video. I have a lot to talk about the casts and things that I've learned, and it's not fair to prejudge it. So wait until I'm done with the second mold, and I will give you my full evaluation of what I think about these at that time. All right, so that is basically an overview of the molds themselves. Here's his mold. What did I do? How did I make mine? How is he stitching pieces together? And what did I do to stitch my pieces together? And actually, if you wait a second, I'll get my real master and I'll show you. I didn't want to start with my master because it's not a fair comparison to his, because I cannot see the master that he used. But this gives you a chance to see the work I did in order to make my face. So I had to cut all of these pieces apart and then hot glue them all together, sand them all down, right? I had to thin areas so that I'd get a nice tight seam. And then on all of the joins on this side, I had to go in and I had to putty in every single thing. I started using Milliput in the beginning. You can see this yellow areas here. Milliput was terrible, not because it doesn't do the job, but because it took so long to do. And so I ended up moving to lightweight spackle, and I was able to push it into cracks and crevices much quicker. And it also allowed me to fill bubbles that were in the tips of a variety of areas of the rock. I had to do a lot of cleaning to make this sheet. I just want to, you know, it's also just to let customers know how much I love my job and work hard for them. This was hours and hours of work, because when you look, just as a quick glimpse, all right, when you look at an area, well, I mean, the areas that are marked, you know, right? That when I first pulled it out of the mold, this is, you know, all messed up in here. You know, you can see bubbles that are in the casts. This is, yeah, first pull. There's bubbles in the tips. All right, now, like I said, we're going to talk more about this in the next video, but this is rough for what I want it to look like. So not only did I have to cut all these pieces apart, then I had to go in and Dremel out a ton of stuff to clean that up, fill all those gaps, fill all those little tips and nooks and crannies, and then actually make the mold itself. So yeah, there you go. This is an overview. Here's a quick look at my mold, his mold, and the things I learned about the mold construction. Next video, we're going to talk about the casts that have been coming out of these and what I learned further from here. So that gives you a look at the molds and gives you a little sense about some of the things that I've learned. And I just want to add one more point at the end here, in that when I made my mold. I was concerned about making a shell for it because I wasn't sure how thick it was going to be. Latex, obviously very soft, and I wanted to give it a backing. And traditionally, a lot of times they use plaster bandages to make the shell, like a mother mold for a normal mold, if you're familiar with that. But it's like making a cradle, right? And we can lay our rubber mold into that, and it'll make sure it holds its shape. So what I did, because I don't have high quality plaster bandages with me, on me, in the studio, I used cheesecloth and plaster, and that did not work at all. So don't do it. It took me about an hour to get all of that plaster back off the mold and get that all cleaned up so I could actually use it. So if making a mother mold is something you're interested in for latex mold down the road, make sure that you use high quality plaster bandages. I cannot recommend any to you at this time because I haven't used them myself, but there's something I'll probably look into down the future, and there are a lot of mold making forums out there that I'm sure could point you in the right direction. So I just wanted to add that as a caveat, just in case. So next video, we're going to take a look at the casts, the progression of them as they've been successively, where am I today? Successively pulled from the molds, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how they are wearing and some of the things that would have helped that not happen as fast as it was. A little error on my part. So stay tuned for that. It'll be the next video, and until then, questions and comments always welcome down below, and stay tuned because I'll be back soon with another TerranScapes video.